It is a beautiful day outside, and I'm here to kind of host Ann Lovejoy, who is with us with something to talk about at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. So, Ann, what's up?
Well, we're going to talk about gardening and how not to talk about gardening. It's so hard to be indoors even long enough to do this when it's such a gorgeous day. But I wanted to start off with a wonderful little story that I heard from Colleen and Alice Mendoza about a gift card that's been floating around for 30 years? That from Bainbridge Gardens that's now being donated to the senior center. So Colleen, do you want to say a little about that? And then Alice can take her part?
It's just such a great story. Alice contacted me because she had a dear friend who passed away, and Alice was going through her things, helping the family out, and ran across a gift certificate that I had participated in 1994, giving it to Pat Belargin for Bainbridge Gardens, a $100 gift certificate that was never used. And Alice contacted me, said she was in possession of this. So we met, I got it, and I went over to Bainbridge Gardens and I talked to Junko's daughter, who is Donna, who is now the owner of Bainbridge Gardens, and told her the story and asked her if they would honor this 28-year-old gift certificate. And she said, absolutely, of course. And it was signed by her dad, and moved her to tears to see that, and was happy to donate. So we will be planting with Ann things at the Senior Center on Earth Day, or whatever Ann's date is for doing the planting, and in honor of Pat. And so I'm very grateful to Alice for doing that. Thanks, Alice. So good to see you here.
It was so wonderful.
And to top it off, Alice is a brand new member of the Senior Center. So
this is my first activity.
Well, Alice, I wanted to hear, you must have thought this was like an archival, right? This is an archaeological dig going through people's stuff.
You know, and it's a much longer story than I'll get into, but nobody from the family came to Pat's house after she passed, and when there was the opportunity to go through things. But I've known Pat, who used to come into my third grade class every year and teach my students, share with my students about her working relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt from 1953 to 1960 while she was at the United Nations. And we became very close friends from that time on. And I was with her up until the day before she passed in hospice in Seattle on June 13th, coming up on 1 year. But I was invited to go over, since the family hadn't, and take any mementos that I wanted. And I had the key. I knew where the key was, and any of her furniture and glassware that's gone to auction. But I just started looking in drawers because I knew it was all going to go to Goodwill. And I opened a drawer, and there was this gift certificate that Colleen had given Pat. And I saw that it hadn't been cashed. And I took it and said, I am going to track this down. I'm going to track this Colleen person down, and whoever else was on the gift certificate, another real estate agent. And I did. And I had Colleen over on my deck for lattes a couple of days ago, and passed on that check. And I can't wait to go see Donna and bring full circle to this. The fact that Junko signed it, that just blew me away. That's
gold
history. And Colleen, you got to keep that gift certificate, right?
I'm going to take a picture of it. That's for sure.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
So thanks for listening.
Colleen, maybe send me the picture and we'll put it in the splash, because it's a wonderful little story.
Great idea. I will, Ann.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about is that on April 22nd, we're going to have our Earth Day party in the garden and be prepping I don't know if any of you have noticed, if you've driven by the center lately, we cleared out all the old overgrown plants, including trunks and those cherry trees and other stuff that was just not very sightly. And we took it all out, or actually, to be truthful, we caused it to be taken out by someone much younger with a truck and a sturdy back. And You know, that is the prime rule of sustainable gardening as we get older. When there's something difficult to do, cause it to be done by others. If you say that to yourself a few times, you'll memorize it. But I guarantee it makes for a much longer, happier gardening life. Anyway, Jesus de Luna and his lovely friends cleared it all out for us. The city is bringing in some compost and topsoil for us. So on April 22nd, we'll spread that, fill the beds, and also fill 3 big aluminum. We've got some of those nice big troughs, 6-foot long water troughs that we've drilled holes in. Don Fox kindly came and drilled the holes, and we're going to put them up on blocks and fill those, and they will make garden beds that could be adopted by you, by somebody. We're hoping that people could come and they could have it as a tiny little pea patch. And actually, I've got some at my house, and they're enough. You can grow quite a lot of vegetables in one of those things if you want to, or herbs, or flowers, or whatever you like. So we'll have 3 of those available. And then also we'll be planting, at least beginning to plant, the front beds. We're going to put in some beautiful plants, some of which we're going to pick up on Saturday when Colleen and I go to Bainbridge Gardens. And it sounds like, Alice, you better meet us there so we can have a three-way session. But I think what a lovely full circle that is, to have that gift come back and be given to the senior center, right? And we're going to make a very sustainable garden out in front with plants that are enduring, mostly evergreen, easy to grow, easy to please, don't need a lot of water, and don't mind full sun and those salty winds from the shore, which is an interesting palette. So we can talk a little about that too. But in the meantime, I would encourage you to please ask questions. You can, if you look down at the bottom of the thing there, it says raise hand. If you click on that, it will put your little hand up, and then I'll know you have a question. And please do, because it's much easier for me to know what you want to hear. As some of you know, I can talk indefinitely, but if I do that, I may or may not hit the thing you're interested in. So the only way I know what you want to know is if you'll speak up, or you can put it in the chat if you want. And maybe Karen can read that to me.
Sure.
So for starters, I wanted to talk a little bit about soil. I just got a pea patch in the Eagle Harbor Church community garden, and it was pretty degraded, and I've been having to renovate it extensively, and that's something I'd like to talk about. But I see that it looks like Sada has her hand up. So would you like to have a question, Sada? No, not really. Okay. So what I'm doing with that bed, it had a lot of heavy material, building material and things piled on it. So the soil was really compressed. And in exhausted soil and compressed soil, you want to open it up, but without disturbing it too much. In the olden days, everybody tilled things. That was thought to be really a useful activity. But now, with more soil science, we know that actually it's pretty destructive and very short-term gain, but long-term deficit. Because what happens when you till is you bring up all these nutrients from lower in the soil. They're expended very quickly. All the carbon is released. All that sequestered carbon that's taken years to be stored is released in a great burst. Your plants do quite well for a short term, but I imagine you've all seen, it's kind of a classic thing. By August, say, the plants in your bed are looking kind of scraggly and hot, and they're not doing so well, and you have to put on lots of water and food. And outside, nearby, there are 8-foot tall weeds thriving, looking perfectly happy, because that soil's undisturbed and it's doing a better job of delivering water and nutrients to those plants. So undisturbed soil is a much better bank. It's a much better repository for nutrients, and it's much easier for plants to access the nutrients and the water from undisturbed soil. So here's this little pea patch, and it really isn't that big. It's about 180 square feet, which is really not that much. So to open the soil, I used my short garden fork, and I just stepped on it, sinking it in, but not rocking it, just stepping it on it to make holes, just like you might aerate a lawn. And I did this whole thing that way, just opening it up and only rocking it if I hit a rock or an old potato, which there were quite a few old potatoes. So we got those all out, but no worms. Yes.
And if you're trying to share a picture, we can't see it. You need to click on present now.
I'm not trying to share a picture.
Oh, okay. The way you were talking, I thought you were trying to share a picture. My bad.
I was trying to build a picture in your mind, Bob.
Oh, okay. Well, that's perfectly acceptable too. Pardon me.
Do try to keep up. It's an image, a mental image. Are you with me?
I'm tuning into the ether so I can see
There you
it
go.
better.
I'll send it to you more clearly.
There you go.
But instead of really forking the soil up, I'm just just putting the fork in, making the holes, watering it because it was very, very dry. And that's the other thing, being aware that the soil is dry all the way down, just as it would be in middle of May, and it's only middle of April, but we're already seeing how dry it's been. And the wind doesn't help because the wind is whipping off the surface moisture as fast as it can. So I watered, and then I put down about 2 to 3 inches of compost, mature compost, and I watered that because otherwise it just sucks all the moisture you just put in the soil right up into the compost. And then I raked it out and let it sit for a while. And what that does is it allows the soil biota to kind of wake up, have breakfast. This new compost you put down is fertilizing the soil, not because there's no plants in it at this point, really. But allowing a few weeks of time for that beautiful alchemical process to start taking place, the soil wakes up, it starts to come back to life. And really interesting studies have shown that as little as a 1/4 inch of compost can begin the sequestering carbon cycle again almost immediately, within hours. So putting that compost down starts to restore the carbon balance. It starts to wake up the soil biota. And the beauty part is you don't have to do anything. You just rake it out, wet it down, and let it do its work. I always like the passive parts of gardening because they don't hurt your back so much. And after all that shoveling and wheelbarrowing and raking out, it was kind of nice to have a quiet stage. Now, somebody had a hand up. Who is it?
It's,
Sheila.
No, I really didn't. I sure I would love to talk to you, but no, I didn't mean to have my.
You might want to press that. There you go.
we had a text box.
Yeah, there you go.
Robert asked what soil to use for new tomato planters.
Okay, new tomato planters, for one thing, I would be very slow to plant my tomatoes this year because the night temperatures we had frost, heavy frost just a couple nights ago, and have several times. The soil temperature is still in the low 40s, and sometimes lower than that, depending on where you are, especially in a shady situation. So you want to wait till the soil temperatures have come up into the mid 50s. 55 is the magic temperature at which tomato plants will actually thrive and grow. And under 55 degrees, and this is soil, mind you, not just air temperatures, under 55 degrees will actually stunt the growth of the tomato plants, peppers, eggplants, and other tropicals like that. Beans, for instance, will probably rot rather than grow when soil temperatures are under 55. So for the tomatoes, I'd wait. You can go ahead and get the best soil I know of is an E.B. Stone mix called the 420 mix, and I believe is what it's called, but it was favored by cannabis growers. 420 is kind of slang for growing dope, apparently, or something. But it's a very well-balanced, very hearty, rather rich mixture, which suits tomatoes all the way because they're gross feeders. It's a horticulture term. That doesn't mean they have poor manners or slop all over the table. It means they need a lot of feeding, and they need it often. So when you get that soil, you get a good, say, 4 to 6 weeks of sort of free fertilizer with it because it's very, very well mixed. You can find it at Bainbridge Gardens and possibly at Bay Hay. I don't know if they carry E.B. Stone or not. Carolyn's saying, yes, they do. So those nurseries, maybe Valley too, I'm not really sure. But E.B. Stone makes a lot of good mixtures. I like Edna's. That was the grandmother of the family, apparently. Edna's mix for potting plants is nice. Another good one that I like to add on top and mulch with is something from Whitney Farms, which is the mixture of cow manure and compost. It's half and half. So composted cow manure, and compost is a wonderful top dressing. And cow manure is kind of fascinating, has hormones in it because it comes from dairy cows, right? So some of the hormones that are included encourage plant growth as well as baby cow growth. Now, why? I do not know, but they do. So it's a fairly powerful, it's not fertilizer as such, but it encourages rapid plant growth, healthy rapid plant growth. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to talk a little about is humic acid. Now here I'm going to hold something up, Bob, so you don't have to use your imagination. But it's probably reversed, right? Rich
No, we
humic
see it,
acid.
we see it.
Can you see it?
Rich humic.
Rich humic comes in as liquid, or you can get it also, it's called earth juice, this kind. You can get it also as granulated. And it's kind of cool stuff. Humic acid is naturally occurring. It's found in almost every kind of soil that's ever had plants growing in it. When it's mined, it's ancient. It's mined from ancient layers of leonardite. It's called, which, like, I know, right? But it's part of the decomposition process that makes compost. And it does three things, basically. It improves soil texture. It buffers and neutralizes soil pH. So if your soil is very acid or very alkaline, it's kind of a nice buffering agent. And it's part of what makes compost buffering as well. But it helps kind of, and for vegetable gardens especially, neutral is better. Like a lot of course, our native plants like acid soils, and a number of perennials are fine with that too. But vegetables pretty much want a neutral soil. And so do lawns. If you're still growing a lawn, humic acid is your great friend, because you can scatter that instead of trying to fertilize it. And you'll find that you'll get much better balanced lawn growth. It neutralizes the pH. It improves water and nutrient take-up. So it really improves root growth in plants. It stimulates extra root growth. And the root tips are what take up the nutrients. So the more root tips you can promote, the more you'll get a plant that's pretty independent and able to take care of itself, which again is more sustainable for the gardener, right? And it's also a great soil conditioner. It will actually open and loosen tight soils and improve sandy soils and help them retain moisture better. So humic acid is one of those sort of not as well known soil additives that is really worth your time. And you don't need a ton of it, like about an ounce and a half, liquid ounce and a half per gallon can cover about 100 square feet, which is a fair amount. And so it's not super expensive either. It's just one of those handy things. You said mulch tomatoes with cow manure and something else. What was the something else? It's a mixture called the Barnyard Blend, put out by, I think Whitney Farms has it. And I think that, what's the composting facility? Cedar Grove. I think Cedar Grove has a mixture too. So you can get it bagged. They have it at Ace. They have it a bunch of places. The Barnyard Blend is a combination of aged composted dairy manure and compost. It's an excellent top dressing for any kind of vegetables and editables, but it's also great for your perennial gardens and so stuff like that. But I definitely like it with tomatoes. The other thing tomatoes really like is a little seaweed extract. Now here's my liquid seaweed. Yeah. Lots of different kinds. Natural kelp, cold water processed, means it doesn't have any additives. Kelp is the fastest growing plant on the planet, as far as we know at this point. And kelp extracts are really helpful for plants. You can foliage spray, you can spray it on the foliage, or you can put it in water and put it around the roots and stuff. And what it does is not only does it promote growth, but it promotes stronger cell walls, which makes for denser foliage, which means the foliage is more resistant to diseases, right? So a little kelp extract is a really good thing. Now, people used to just go get kelp off the beach and put it in their gardens. The problem with that, there are several. One is that you're going to get salt with that, and some of the minerals are fine, and a little salt is okay, but a lot of salt is actually pretty bad for plants. In fact, one of the things ancient enemies used to do when they took over cities was salt the fields so that everything died. So you don't want salt in your garden. But also anymore, we know that every time we start doing things like raking large amounts of kelp off the beach, we're disturbing a huge environmental web that doesn't need that. It doesn't need any more abuse from us. So we try to take nothing and leave only footprints and take only photographs. Isn't that what they say? So rather than hauling it up from the beach, just use these extracts, which are actually grown in pens and kept in clean water and harvested that sustainably. So there's that. Now, surely someone has a question, so I don't have to just dribble on all this.
Oh, is the kelp extract mostly for tomatoes, or can I use it for other things?
I use it for a lot of things. I use it in hanging baskets and color bowls and that kind of stuff, where you don't want to overfeed. However, here's the thing. All those plants that are in pots, if you use commercial fertilizers, they will get washed away within a couple weeks. They generally last about 2 weeks. So in a commercial nursery, for instance, when they're flats of plants and stuff, they've been fed constantly by the growers. When they come to the nursery, they have to be fed periodically too, or they start losing ground because they were on a very small pot and they don't have a lot of nutrients available to them. So when you get them home and you're watering frequently because it's hot summer, you're literally washing away the fertilizers, which goes straight out into the water system, of course, and into the waterways. So to avoid that, I try to use things like the kelp and the humic acids and make that kind of mixture with compost and the cow manure instead of using chemical fertilizers. Now, I saw something go by. Karen, can you read it to me from this?
Yes, it's this is from Karen Jones. My tomatoes need to be in pots. Do these same the same soil and additives work for that? And also, what size pot should I use?
Yes. But use big pots, like a tree pot, or the biggest pot you can, because really, tomato plants, like I was saying before, it's the growing tips of the roots that do all the locating of an uptake of water and nutrients. So in a small pot, the root growth is restricted, and pretty soon they've exhausted the soil and they literally bump into each other and there's not much room. So I have really large pots, the kind that like trees and shrubs come in, and they're more like a 20-gallon or even 50-gallon, not just 5 or 10. Those are the ones I use for tomatoes. And you can save them and use them over and over, but you want to replace the soil periodically. Oops, sorry. You want to replace the soil periodically because it will get used up. But it can go into your compost heap, or it can be spread out on a bed, and then you start again. And again, the kind of potting soil, in a big, deep pot like that, you don't need to put the very best soil on top. You can fill in the bottom with a regular planting mixture, and then use that 420 mix for the top 18 inches, say, because that's where most of the action is at first, at least. Does that make sense?
Great. Okay. So what tomatoes are you recommending for us to use plant this year, Ann?
Well, just a sec. Sada has her hand up. Let's.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sada.
Thank you. Just a question, Ann. What do you think of Osmocote, that slow release fertilizing pellets?
Well, here's the thing. Slow release. Those pelletized fertilizers are made to release when soil temperatures hit, usually it's 70 degrees or 72 degrees. Sometimes in our summers, that doesn't ever happen. Sometimes it happens on a day in May when suddenly it turns 80 or 85. We often get those random days, and then it will dump all at once and it will burn. And sometimes kill starts because it's too much, too fast. So they're not regulated properly. They're useful in a greenhouse situation where there's a very controlled ambient temperature and constant moisture, consistent moisture. Does that make sense? But in our gardens, consistency is not what happens in the Northwest because we have weather instead. So I don't like those pelletized fertilizers because they're too random. And also a lot of it ends up getting wasted because, like I said, they do tend to dump. Then the excess is carried off in the water. And at this point in Washington State, every single waterway in Washington State carries significant traces of up to 20 to 25 different pollutants, most of which are agricultural. And actually, most of them come from home gardeners rather than farmers, because farmers have to make things pay. And so they are less apt to be careless, though not entirely, but for the most part, they're a little more careful with their fertilizers and stuff because it costs them a lot of money. So home gardeners and lawns are usually the main culprits for flushing a lot of excess fertilizers into the water. And I guess that's the long answer, but the short answer is I don't like them.
Okay, I just fertilized my hanging basket fuchsias, which I haven't put out yet, but I fertilized them with Osmocote for the summer. Do you think I should try to take it out of that basket and put another, like a Miracle Grow or something on them?
Well, if they're not out yet, are they showing growth?
Yes, yeah. Some of them have buds on them.
Okay, then yeah, you can start to fertilize it. But yeah, if you do something like Miracle Grow, look at a 10-10-10, not a 20-20-20.
Sure.
That's too much anyway. Plants can't really use that. A lot of those high number fertilizers are really just waste.
They're waste. Yeah.
Appeals to people who think they want faster, more, better, quicker. But really, slow and steady is much, much better for plants and people and the planet. So if you do use a Miracle Grow, you can mix it with some of the humic acid and a little of the liquid seaweed in a gallon jug and try that for your baskets, and you'll find you need less fertilizer, and the soil gets exhausted so quickly in those baskets. And of course, then the roots are they're surviving entirely on what we give them because they have depleted their soil. So then you have to feed at least every couple weeks, every 2 to 3 weeks. And of course, you want to water well before you feed, or you risk burning the roots.
Should I take the Osmocote out? It's on the top. I didn't scratch it in very deep.
It's not going anywhere. It's not going to do anything. And it's in a basket. It's not like you're using it in the ground or on a lawn. But I guess it's not going to. The only harm it would really do is if we do get those really hot days and it might dump. But an actively growing fuchsia is probably just going to eat it all up. Some plants are pretty happy eaters, like roses, clematis, tomatoes, beans. They'll just take it, whatever it is. So yeah, some plants, on the other hand, could be killed outright by that. And most of the native woodland plants can be killed by a 10-10-10. It's too strong.
Really?
There's too much. They're not adapted for it. And it's basically like poison to them. I mean, they can literally turn black. Ask me how I found that out. But yeah, it's native stuff, at the very most, you would want to give them as a 5-5-5. And on the whole, they're going to be much happier with their natural diet. When you think about all these natural environments, woodlands and prairies and riversides and ponds and swamps, nobody goes around putting. Well, do you want to unmute yourself? Because there's some funny scratchy noise happening. Sounds like you're doing your fingernails or something.
Where do I will, sir.
It's the way over on the left.
No.
The little microphone icon. And if you click on it, it will, yeah, there you go. Now I've lost my track. Where was I?
Ooh.
I know, nobody knows, right?
We were talking about Osmocote and
maybe treatments for native plants.
Oh, thank you, Reed. I knew somebody would be listening. Sometimes I get going and I don't even know where I stop. But yeah, so native plants, of course, that's right. Then all the native natural environments, they are not tended by humans. Park rangers do not wander around with Miracle Grow. They grow because nobody takes much of anything away. If animals graze, they also leave their droppings behind, which will degrade. And in extreme environments like the high Arctic, the only place that plants grow is where the elk have left little piles of elk manure. It's pretty cool. And that can actually start almost like a plant oasis in time, or where a caribou dies, a whole colony of plants can arise eating that body over time. It's kind of grim, but kind of cool. And yeah, so when we think about our native plants and our woodland gardens, the worst possible thing you can do to your woodland garden is tidy it up and take away the leaves and the twigs and the, if a great big branch falls down, it's okay. You can take that. Or you might want to leave it as a nurse log. But in a smaller area, you might want to gather it up. But generally speaking, you want to leave all the biomass that is shed by the trees and let those rot down slowly and nurture the soil. If it looks too messy, you could put some of that nice cow manure and compost mixture over it, and that will look more tidy. But tidiness is death in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nature knows how to take care of itself.
Mostly it does. I mean, nature makes mistakes now and again too, but on the whole, these the plant relationships and soil relationships and weather relationships have taken thousands of years to develop. And now, of course, we're seeing shifts of climate that are making some long held beliefs not so steady, like never plant X or only plant Y. One thing that we said for many years is never water your native plants in summer because many of them are intolerant of summer water. Well, it turns out now that because we've had so many dry summers, actually native plants have been really stressed and are dying in a lot. You can see small young cedars, for instance, and small firs dead and dying all over Kitsap, for instance, and certainly up in the mountains because of those dry summers. So now we're saying, yeah, actually you do want to water your woodlands on a dry summer. And we had such a wet late winter, but now that spring is here, it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting much more rain. And the NOAA report, that's so annoying. They always say, you know, you have about a 50-50 chance of being either wetter than normal or drier than normal. I'm like, oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. But that's what they're saying to us. So we don't know. And it also may be a cooler, grayer summer, but that doesn't mean a wetter summer. And I think those, if you who've been around for a long time, remember some of those long gray summers, the soil gets really dry, but you always think it's going to rain, so you don't water. But you really, really must if you are intending your garden to grow well. You have to water regularly and check the soil down an inch or two with your finger. And if it's dry, you got to water. And that mulch, that compost and that barnyard blend of compost and mature dairy manure, that will help retain moisture considerably.
Excellent. Yeah. So what should I be? Oh, let's see, Colleen, have a question.
Ann, I just loved your opening comments about not tilling the soil and then putting compost over them. Last year, I created a new garden that is large, and I use the premium soil from Tilts for the soil, and just so happy with it. So this year I'm weeding a lot, and I'm ready to maybe plant a few more things in this garden. But do I just add the compost over it?
Yes, and this is actually a really good time to put compost down, because by the middle of May, a well-planted border, you won't be able to see the soil anymore. Now, if the plants are really young and spaced properly, you'd have some chance still because they wouldn't be touching. But generally speaking, in a mature garden, you shouldn't be able to see much soil at all by middle of May. So now you can put down compost. Now, because it's dry, you want to water first, maybe sprinkler, and then put the compost down and water again so that that compost gets well moistened as well. And if you have a really large bed, you might want to use a coarse, not bark, but wood chips, arborist chips, and put those toward the back. Pretty heavy. At the library, we found about we actually put like 4 to 6 inches in some of our worst areas where we had to do a lot of weeding on top of the compost. And what that does is it will slowly degrade and rot down. But in the meantime, it keeps a lot of light off the weed seeds. And weed seeds, many of the weed seeds need light and air to germinate. So they don't need to be planted. They're brought up by disturbance. In fact, they're called seeds of disturbance. And it's things like foxgloves or fireweed, or that pop up wherever their soil is broken. Those are some of the first things you'll see coming back, right? And shotweed. That's another favorite, sometimes called jumping Jesus, because it gets in your eye and you go, ah, Jesus, right? But that plant is one of the first to arrive, and it literally can be pregnant under the soil. Before it breaks the ground, the flowers are already opening and being pollinated, self-pollinated, and when they come up, they scatter them. Like Scotch broom is another explosive seeder, right? That flings its seeds around. So covering things with coarse bark chips or wood chips, arborist chips, that's a really good way to keep the weeds down and keep the moisture in. If it doesn't look good enough for you, then the front of the bed, you can just use that barnyard mix or something, which is more attractive. But the wood chips will hugely help. And if you have an area that's really weedy and just making you crazy, get a whole lot of of wood chips, coarse wood chips dumped on top of it, and rake them out as even 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches. Kitsap County did a study some years ago now on old stands of mature ivy where it had just taken over woods, and they found that 12 to 18 inches of bark chips killed 80% of the ivy in 3 to 6 months. Just smother mulching, it's called. And
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, that is a big problem in a lot of areas.
Huge problem.
Oof.
But once you get to that point where a lot of it's been killed off, then you can pull in the winter when the ground is open and soft, you can pull out masses of roots. And of course, on a tree, when you're trying to get ivy off a tree, if you just cut it as far as you can reach, so 5 to 6 feet up, cut it and pull everything off below that, what's above will die within, it takes a while sometimes, as much as 2 or 3 years. But it will die and fall off by itself. You don't have to do anything to it or hire an arborist to take it off. When we were down in Waterfront Park, doing a big ivy cleanup down there one year, somebody was cutting the old growth and you could hear it explode. He said it was like a girdle and the tree literally got bigger because it was strangling. It had been growing so long, and some of the roots were the size of my arm.
Wow.
Vines and roots into the tree. So ivy is just horrible. But yeah, if you can pull out as much as you can and smother mulch with coarse wood chips, anything will be suppressed by that, really. And yet you're actually beneficially helping the soil, because in time, when you've killed off the weeds and things, what's left is going to be much more open, and you'll find worms and all kinds of biotic life in there that probably weren't there before.
We'll have to let the weed warriors know about this.
They probably do know, I would think.
Okay.
But yeah, it wouldn't hurt. Tell Jeanette.
Yeah. Because, we take hikes and we see these big bunches of ivy, and they're just crawling up the trees, and they're just trying to kill them.
Yep. Well, and they create a wind sail effect. So when they climb up a bare tree that catches the wind in the winter and that pulls them down, because it's heavy, a great big mass of ivy when it's wet just weighs sometimes 1,000 pounds in a tree, and it can take it right over if it's unstabilized by, wet soil and heavy wind, like we often see in our winter storms.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk a little about is another great restorative technique for soil that's been exhausted or new soil that you're just getting started is to grow peas and beans the first year, because they are nitrogen fixers. They actually capture atmospheric nitrogen out of the soil, and they store it in their roots. They have bacteria that help them. And if you pull up a plant of a nitrogen fixer, which would be alders, scotchburn, among other things, you'll notice the little white nodules. They look like tiny white pearl beads stuck on the roots, and those are actually full of nitrogen. So you can cut them off and leave them, and they'll actually release the nitrogen into the soil, which is kind of cool. So to restore the soil in my little pea patch, I'm just growing this year just peas and beans. But the peas I've got, I wanted to show you. I don't know if you can see that they're soaking in a bowl of water here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can buy something called inoculant for peas and beans. Legume inoculants are a kind of bacteria that help them make roots in cold, wet soil. So in spring, when some plants have a hard time getting going, the inoculant will help them, the nitrogen fixers, get going a little faster. But really, you don't actually need to do that. Around here, the peas will get started fine. Like you could have planted them a month ago. I have some in pots that I started a month ago, and they're perfectly happy despite the frosty nights, and are growing strongly. Sweet peas also, you can start anytime now, in pots or in the ground. But before I do plant them, I do soak them, because a lot of times they're very, very dry. These are actually Oregon sugar pod peas that I saved from my garden. So every year when you gather your vines, you always seem to find a few that you missed, right? Well, if you save those and let them dry out, you can plant them the next year. And if they're the only kind you grew, they won't have cross-pollinated with anything, and they'll still be pretty true to what you planted in the first place. And especially with those heritage older varieties that have been grown for a long, long time, they're fairly stable strains, and they tend to stay pretty true because they've been selected for many, many generations.
Mm.
So seed saving, is just a fun way to, and you might notice that it's in a handy dandy container that formerly held organic granulated garlic. I like to recycle as much as possible and use lots of those things over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's okay to plant peas right now.
Oh, yeah.
Outside.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can actually plant peas sometimes as early as February, but certainly by March. But it's not too late to put them in now.
Okay.
Either. So you can, but soak them, some people overnight, at least a couple hours in just tepid water is fine. Karen Jones, you have a question. You're still muted.
Go ahead and talk, Karen. Uh-oh. Go ahead, unmute. There you go. Oh, your sound's not coming through. Hey, Karen, could you type in the text box, please? Yeah, for some reason.
No, it seems like she's unmuted, but it's not.
I know, but she's not it's not coming through for some reason.
Huh.
Oh, well.
Yeah, but if you want to put it in the chat, we can take it that way.
Yep. Alice. Do you have a question, Alice?
No, we can't hear you either. Let's see, you got to unmute while Karen is typing.
How about now?
Good.
There we go. Can hear you.
Okay, somebody asked earlier about some of your suggested tomatoes to grow, Ann, and when to put them in the ground, or when to do that.
Some summers you can plant practically any tomatoes and they'll be great if it's one of those hot, dry summers, but mostly they're not. So my favorite really reliable tomato is called Seattle's Best, and it's a semi-heritage that was collected and in the 40s and 50s, kept as a strain by a number of Seattle gardeners, and now it's a really solid strain and you can get it commercially. And it's really reliable. It's really one of the very best. And it's a good flavorful, it's about an apple-sized fruit or maybe a little smaller. Good slicers, great flavor, and they really are early too, which is nice and pretty long lasting. Another one that's been very productive and consistently flavorful for me is called Campari, like the Campari soda. That one is a cluster former, and the smaller ones are about golf ball size, and they get up to small apple size, like a lady apple. And those also are very long, very, very productive, and really delicious at every stage. Even the young ones, you can put them in a stir fry or something. Like at the end of the season when you have all the little greeny, yellowy ones, I use those in all kinds of things. But those two are extremely reliable. And then I also am very fond of one called Midnight Snack, and it's a black cherry tomato. And so it's a cluster former, and of course, smallish cherry size in big sprays and extremely productive. It's one of the funny ones because it has black skin. It can be difficult to tell when they're ripe, and they are rock hard when they're not ripe, and very sour. But as they ripen, they get incredibly delicious. They have very nuanced, wonderful sweet tart balance. And the way to tell is that the skin will go from being glossy to being a little bit matte. And you can start to see a brownish undertone develop in it, or sometimes streaks of red, or red. It might be red on the underside that doesn't get the sun. And then you can pick them, and they are so delicious. They're just irresistible. So that's another big favorite for me.
So would you, Ann, I would be doing these not from seed because I don't have a big enough area to buy a package of seeds and do it that way. Are these available like to the farmers markets? Have you seen these at the farmers market as starts?
Actually, most of the nurseries have them as starts. Farmers market might well have them as starts. And I don't know if we're doing the tomato distribution this year or not. Reed, do you know? Or Sheila or Karen?
I don't know. Reed's probably busy. I am not sure. I'd love it when that happens.
Yeah. We've had a wonderful family has grown many, many extra tomatoes and distributed them free at the senior center the last few years. And and it usually happens kind of right about now.
Hmm,
Oh, I see
yeah.
Karen's put her thing in the chat. Can you read it to me?
Yes, it is. Let's see. I saved some seeds from an amazing tomato that I got from a neighbor. All meat, almost no seeds. Fantastic flavor. Looks like a really nice heirloom tomato. I got 3 of the seeds to sprout, so I'm excited for these to survive. Besides the 55-degree temperature, do the plants need to be a certain size before I transplant them?
No, the size doesn't really matter as much as the temperature of the soil, but but what you want to do is as they grow up, because those pots are nice medium size, but the next move, I put them in a gallon and make sure that they get pretty even light. Looks like, are you putting them in a windowsill or what? No, maybe you've got lights or something. Oh, so frustrating, we can't hear you. Oh, she's finished.
know.
If you put them in a window, you just have to turn them every day to make sure that they grow evenly, because otherwise they start to migrate toward the sun.
Oh, good idea. I never thought about that.
Oh yeah,
perfect.
every few days at least, but I do them almost daily to keep them from developing too much on one side and not enough on the other. Then if you have LED lights, overhead lights, they actually provide, they're pretty good. There are a lot of LED plant lights available, and they're inexpensive to run, and they actually are very, very effective, which is kind of nice. So you can just put an LED lamp right nearby. Oh,
Wendy and Dawn, here, let me get a little up. Wendy and Dawn have been growing and donating the tomatoes, but they are not doing so this year. Oh, dear.
too bad.
Well, it's been a weird year for everybody.
It's true. But that might be a project that, so one of the other projects I wanted to talk about quickly is a garden club that we're going to start doing. We'll probably do the gardens talk like this as a Zoom at once a month, first Tuesdays. But I also want to do fourth Tuesdays at the Senior Center, 10 to 12, as a garden club, because we're going to have these beds for people to adopt. We're going to be taking care of the gardens and learning to grow things and planting and harvesting and mulching and all that. And I just thought it'd be really fun to do it as a live in-person thing. And now that we can do that, if you've been vaccinated and you're fully vaccinated and you're a couple weeks out and you can wear a mask and walk around, you can, or not even walk around necessarily, but if you can be there and not be square, we can actually garden together. And I think that would be so fun. So like I was saying in the very beginning, we have these troughs and a couple of beds that are going to be available to somebody who wants to show up. And you could either come as a volunteer to help weed and water and prune and fiddle with the beds that are already planted, or you could adopt a bed and make that one your own. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with Mary at the Senior Center, and we can start talking about what we're going to be doing. And I will be showing up at the Senior Center every fourth Tuesday between 10 and 12 to be there for this kind of, oh yeah, and Rita said it's Mary at seniorcenter.org.
Yeah, BI Senior Center.
Senior Center.
It's okay.
You probably know how to get a hold of Mary. Anyway, that's one thing I just really wanted to call out because I think it would be a lot more fun. We've been so starved of company, and it's really, for me, I've been doing the Friday Tidy gardening at the library now for 23 or 4 years. And it's sort of a funny thing because we all work independently, but we're all aware of each other and we all take time to visit a little bit. And you're side by side, but it's just companionable in a lovely way that I've been missing. I think a lot of us have.
Yes.
And I thought it'd be a fun way to get back together safely and outside and share some of our pleasure and some of our knowledge. And we'll certainly be growing some tomatoes at the Senior Center because there is no better place. The reflected heat off the building, the full south exposure, being near the water means that there's a few degrees of extra warmth that even on a really cold, if you get an unexpected frost, those plants will be much happier than they will be at my house. So it's a really ideal setting for a lot of that kind of plant. And if you've been frustrated with tomatoes, maybe you want to plant them down at the center and reap the benefits down there.
Absolutely. Hey, Alice, do you have a question? Oh, you want to unmute yourself, Alice?
I think my hand was up from the last question, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
but that's okay. So just going back to something you said earlier, Anne, about the compost and doing that now. I've never totally covered my soil, so you can't see it. It sounds like that when you're talking about compost, are you talking about, should I be going to get the barnyard mix, the manure and the compost, and just spread that everywhere now? Because I tilled the other day because I thought my stuff that I got from tills was compacted. And so I thought I needed to aerate it. And somebody told me to use gypsum to do that. And I didn't, more for soil that's got plants, not vegetables in it, that's just really thick and dense. They said to sprinkle gypsum on it. You haven't mentioned that. You mentioned the
Yeah.
other stuff, but
well, so here's the deal. So gypsum is used sometimes in areas where they have sodic soils with natural salts being high, and it's a binder. We don't need that.
okay.
And it doesn't, you don't need to use that here. A soil that's been compacted, the best thing you can do to heal it is to put some compost down, spread it out, and then put those coarse bark chips on top and leave it alone for a while.
Okay.
And that could be 6 months or a year. And it will open itself up because you will be allowing those natural healing processes to take place in your soil.
And that's like the barnyard mix, would you suggest?
Yeah, or it depends on how big an area. I mean, that's kind of pricey by the bag.
Okay.
If you're doing a bigger area, I would just get like Tills has nice compost, and also indigo, which is out where Emu used to be. Indigo has beautiful, beautiful compost. We've been using that at the community garden. It's very nice.
Did they deliver?
Yep. In fact, we have some at the library right now. You can go look at it. Big heaps of it.
Okay.
You can see if you like it, but it's about $39 a yard, which is a good price.
Okay. And is there a yard minimum delivery?
I don't know. We always get.
I can check. I don't need to take.
Yeah, I always get 12 yards, so there's never a delivery fee.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Sheila, did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually had a couple. First of all, if we're going to do that on Tuesdays, that's excellent, because from what I understand, we may switch these particular speaking times together, something to talk about, to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday anyway, so we won't be missing out on that, which is good. Number two, I've been using stew peas or stupus or whatever forever, and I just love that tomato. And that's the ones that I used to do the put in the oven, you know, like you told me to do last year.
Oh, roasting, yeah.
Roasting them.
Stupis is a good reliable one. Stupis is a Russian tomato. It's from Siberia, so it's bred for short summers, and it is very productive pretty fast. And it's one of the earlier ones to size up. It does need good soil. It will not taste as good if the soil isn't good. It's one that, and here's an interesting tip about tomatoes. It's a little early for this tip, and I'll probably tell you again. To really make the taste of a tomato come alive, go down to the water, not in maybe Eagle Harbor Superfund cleanup site, but perhaps out on one of the beaches where the refreshment is a little more often. Get a gallon of seawater, and then you can dilute it, a quart of seawater diluted with another quart of water. You can use that to each tomato plant just as it's starting to put out flowers, and it will actually integrate into the plant, and it will really pick up the flavor significantly. This came out of Cornell University research for New Jersey tomato farmers. And New Jersey used to be one of the huge tomato producing areas for the East Coast. And then they started having problems with the flavor being flat. And they realized they'd grown the same crop in the same soil for so long, they depleted certain key minerals and nutrients. And so in that balance, they found that by adding salt, they actually got their flavor bounce back. So it's something we can do. And seawater contains not just salt, because they use sea salt. They use a mixture, and you can buy like powdered seawater. That's not the sea salt at the grocery store, but it has all the minerals and stuff in it. It's an agricultural supplement. But we can just go down and get seawater. So there's just a great way to use that. And it brings a lot of minerals as well. as
And
that.
that's exactly what I did last year, and the tomatoes were fantastic.
Isn't that so? It's easy peasy because we live, where we can do that very easily. If you're in Minnesota, it's a little harder.
How often do you do that, Ann?
One time.
Just once. Okay.
Yeah. And again, when they're coming into flower,
Okay.
so that it can integrate into the whole plant.
I'm sorry. When do you do it? At the right when you put the plants in?
No, let them grow for a bit. And then when they're starting to really size up and get a lot of flower, put on a lot of flowers, that's when I do it.
Okay, so you only do it once, but I thought you said you did it twice.
Nope, I do it once.
Okay. Quart and quart. Gotcha.
Yep.
That's what I did last year. It's fantastic.
It worked, right?
It do.
Yeah, I told Bob and Brian about that, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, come on, it's Ann Lovejoy. Of course she knows what she's talking about.
Would I lie to you? Would I lie to you?
No.
Well, maybe we have time for one more question, and then I have a rehearsal. My music group is meeting for the second time since January of last year. We're finally starting to rehearse again.
Oh, dear.
Amazing.
That's fantastic.
It is. So any last questions, or otherwise I will see you on April
Next month. And it'll either be Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, since we are going to be probably not doing something to talk about on Tuesdays and Thursdays anymore.
We thought we might just do this as we used to do it on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Maybe we'll just do it that way. I don't know.
Okay, that's
Reed will figure it out for us. And
I'm always free on a Tuesday.
well, there you go. Me too. That's my best day.